Alright, so welcome back guys. Once your first time here, I'm Vision here by Tampering as our video. Today we're giving you guys my review of Power Rangers Jungle Fury. Now Power Rangers, I'm instant to hit the subscribe button down below. Hit that bell icon for more Power Rangers content from me. Moving forward. Now let's begin. Now, similar to my review with Power Rangers SPD, I will be starting off with the setting. Now, unlike SPD, Jungle Fury kind of has, and I hate to use the word, but more of a kind of generic setting, because SPD took place in the future. However, here, Jungle Fury just takes place in kind of a random, everyday kind of city. So, there's nothing special about it, nothing unique. But I think that there are certain areas in the show that I think definitely make it stand out. Of course, you got Jungle Karma Pizza, the Rangers' main hangout where they work and where they train, which I always like that. I think that having it be the same place, like where they work and where they train, makes things a lot easier, makes things flow a little bit better. They're not running back and forth between, their hideout and their workplace, similar to what happens like in Ninja Storm and Mystic Force. So I like it better here, and also adds for some little bit more of kind of comedy moments. So I like that. Jungle Karma Pizza is a good place. It's a small, intricate place, and it gives you enough time there. But also you got the little dojo on top where they train and work or sleep, which I also like that. I think that's a cool little place. Also, they're both kind of small areas, so they didn't have to worry about kind of having a bunch of empty space, or having to, make it look all nice and fancy. They're kind of small, intricate places, so they're more homey kind of, they're more welcoming. The set designers don't have to go through all this different stuff for it to look like this big upscale thing. So I think they did a good job there. Then you got I forget what it's called, the Paisho Temple. I know I probably just butchered that, but you have the temple there. I really liked it. I really like this idea. In some ways, I do wish it was the main place they trained, but at the same time, I'm glad it's not. Just because I really like the aesthetic of how it looks, the old-timey temple look. You don't really get to see much there. You mainly just focus on, the forbidden room where Daishi was kept, along with the little courtyard where they train and where they got their tattoos at the end. So you don't get to see much, and that's kind of why I wish they had done more with it, because I would have liked to seen a little bit more of it done. It's just I wish they would have had at least one episode focused at the temple. I know that's kind of being a little much, but I do wish that would have been something that came about. And then you got Daishi's temple. Now I really love this temple. It's a great little villain lair compared to the other villains in the past. And one thing I like about it is that you get to see a good chunk of the temple. You get to see the main throne room where Daishi is. You got a little jail cell. You got the little room where they conducted the ritual to bring back the Phantom Beast. And then I can't remember if it's the same exact room or not, but you had the room where they had the captured masters at when they created the Spirit Rangers. So you got a good look into more than just one room at a temple. You got to explore it more and see more about it. So I really liked it. I think that all the locations here were pretty good. You did also have the little hideouts for the three masters. And I actually did like this. You had Master Fant in the jungle hiding out. It goes along with his little elephant motif or animal spirit. So I really like that. I thought that was really cool. I mean, they give you a reason as to why he's there, but it also makes sense given his spirit animal being the elephant in the jungle. So that made sense. Then you have Master Fing, RJ's dad, who was at the seashore. Again, his animal spirit's the shark. It makes sense that he'd be more towards water. Again, I really like how they added that in there. The only one that I kind of felt was I don't really get it was Master Swoop, how he just kind of lived in the middle of the woods, since his animal spirit was like a bat. I feel like they should have done something a little different there. I'm not saying do a cave, but just something a little more different that makes it kind of connects with his bat spirit. Having it just be in the middle of the wilderness it was kind of like a meh to me. It just kind of felt underwhelming. Those are the big major settings for Jungle Fury. There are a lot more than I had originally thought, but going over them, I think they did a lot of good stuff with the set design and connecting it with their animal spirits. And the villains and the Rangers areas were very well done. And I think with it being a shorter season, they were did a good job achieving what they wanted to in this short amount of time with the settings and utilizing it very well. Now we move over to the story of Power Rangers Jungle Fury. Now, this is an interesting one because I go back and forth on this how I feel about the story because you know if you watched my SPD kind of review, I mentioned I don't really like when villain goals are generic, where it's just like they want to rule the world, and that's kind of what Daishi's motives are. So as much as I love this season, his goal is kind of generic to me because like I said, he just wants to rule the planet, and I guess bring animals back to their former glory as the you know kings of the planet or whatever. I do kind of like that idea. I do wish they kind of had expanded on that though a little bit, where maybe there are humans or people out there who agree with him that they need to return the planet to the animals. I think that'd have been a good idea, but just having it be where he wants to rule the world, I don't know. It just kind of feels a bit generic to me. I do like the story arcs that they had within the show. I think how they did about going with the show and the story arcs gave it a good sense of flow because you can separate the story in different arcs. If like you're a fan talking to another person, you can say, I like this arc because like you start off with the generic kind of Monster of the Week episodes, but you slowly get into the different arcs where you start with like the Five Fingers of Poison arc. Then you go into the arc regarding the Three Masters, the Overlord arc. And then in that, you got smaller arcs as well regarding the Rangers and Daishi. You got the little arc with Dominic when he joins. The previous to that, you also had the little arc with RJ. Then you end out the series with the Phantom Beast. So, I like that aspect of the story where they have these little arcs slash chapters in regards to the storytelling, because I think it helps in regards to navigating the story and giving it a good cohesive story, because not all seasons have that. So having these arcs definitely helped the season, but the goal of the villain is just what kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because it just feels more on the generic side to the villain goals. And if you've seen my videos, I really don't like generic of, oh, I just want to rule the world kind of villains. Now we're gonna move over to the Ranger side of the story. Now, unlike some of the other seasons, we do have the main five, but then as the story goes on, you get a 3 extra Rangers, which we'll get into later. I do kind of like how they start out with just 3. I do think that does help the story to a bit, because when you start off with 3 Rangers, you have less that you have to develop, so you have more time to develop them when you go into the overall story. So, you start off with Casey, Theo, and Willie. Now, starting off with Casey, he's our Red Ranger. Now, the one thing I like about Casey is he wasn't meant to be the Red Ranger. He was, originally not chosen to be one of the protectors of the Temple to Daishi, or whatever you want to call it. He wasn't originally meant to be that person. So, in a way, he ended up becoming a Red Ranger due to circumstances. So, he has a lot to prove to himself. And I always really like those kind of stories where the character, wasn't the original choice, so they have to go, through an arc where they have to prove themselves. And, I think they did a good job of that. You got the start of the season where he's still, new to the idea, and he's the new person in town in regards to the trio, and he has to lead them at the same time. And, and he goes from RJ, and you got him going to Theo and Willie to get advice throughout the beginning of the season as he is the leader. And, he's new to this whole idea of being a part of this team. So I really like that. Also, you get into this mold later on where you got him as leader, but when RJ becomes a ranger, they kind of begin to have this inner turmoil within the team. I wouldn't say turmoil, but a little bit of beef because RJ starts taking a little bit more of a lead because he's the mentor, and Casey kind of takes issue with that. Which I always like that because, he's the Red Ranger, and then he's been leading the team for probably, I think it was like half the season at this point. And then all of a sudden, RJ shows up, becomes a Ranger, and, kind of takes the lead. So I definitely feel like that, again, brings up some of those insecurity levels that he had at the start of the season, where he was the Cub and, he had to prove himself. So I really like that. I'm not saying like RJ should have overshadowed him, but I do like how they brought that little thing in with Casey's story arc with him, growing as a character. And then you got him going throughout the rest of the season where he works with Dom. He kind of gets this relationship with him. He doesn't think Dom takes the whole being a ranger and hero seriously. And, he has to, realize that everybody's different. And he is able to become accepting of Dom as not just a part of the team, but as a person as well. As he is different than just the standard, ranger architect. He's more of like a goofball. So I really like that because Casey also has to deal with that. And you go for this arc with Casey, and like I said, he's the Cub at the beginning of the series, and by the end he becomes the Tiger Master. I really like that because it offers a lot of growth for the character. It offers a lot of just connection. It gives a lot more to do. And one thing I've heard one YouTuber say, and I'm not gonna say who it is, just not to start up beef, but he said that he didn't like Casey because at the start of the season, in episode 1, when confronted by Jared, he tells him, I don't want any trouble, and he said that makes Casey look like a bad Red Ranger. However, I disagree with that 100%. I think that it actually makes his character better because it shows development within his character. And plus, he's not the type of person to fight back when, Jared is being a jerk. He only fights when necessary. He's not going to, fight with Jared over just this one incident where he didn't give him a towel. So, like, it shows that Casey isn't just this person that's going to jump into battle as a Red Ranger, which he shouldn't. Yes, there are Rangers that do that, but also, that's not always a good quality to have. So it offers him development, and it's not like, he's a bad Red Ranger. He has to just grow. He's the Cub at the start of the season, so he has to grow into the Tiger Master. So I really like that. I also like how in the I don't know if you call it the finale, but the finale arc where Casey doesn't get his tattoos, his stripes. So he ends up going on this whole different path that leads him to getting his tattoos as stripes. So I think that's another good thing. You got the Red Ranger, the leader, and unlike Theo and Willie, who get their master stripes at their duel or fight with their masters and whatnot, you got Casey who has to go on his own journey to get his stripes, unlike the other two. He's the Red Ranger, so he has to go on his own journey to get the reward or whatever you want to call it. And, everybody's going against him, but he is the one who thinks he's doing the right thing, and that's what gets him his stripes. I think that was a great way to give him an arc and end out his arc as becoming a Tiger Master. And I just really love what they did with his story arc as a Red Ranger. I definitely think he's similar to Jungle Fury's this season. I think Casey's a very underrated Red Ranger as well. I think he's one of the best Red Rangers, and like I said, I think they did a good job with his character development, having him start off as the Cub, and then by the end of the season, he becomes the Tiger Master. Then you got Theo the Blue Ranger. Now, unlike Casey, Theo is more of a rule follower. He is very serious in his training, and he's goes by the books. He's kind of, I don't know if you'd call him type A, but he really is like a rule follower. He isn't he's a no nonsense person. So, one of the arcs for him is he has to learn how to be kind of more laid back and not be such a rule follower and such. So I really like that for him. Unlike Casey, Theo doesn't get as much of a kind of arc. His, like I said, is more him trying to learn how to relax and not be so serious all the time. You get that, you kind of get that with his training with Master Swoop in the beginning of the season, where he's learning how to use the jungle fans and trying to become more of, kind of laid back there. And then it kind of comes back in the Phantom Beast arc where you have his brother show up, and it kind of goes along with that. Again, Theo's arc is kind of smaller in comparison, but I think they do give him a good arc of just trying to kind of lay back and not be so serious. And he also is very hard on it. He's very critical of his other Ranger allies, which is another thing he has to overcome. Cause like especially you'll see it with his relationship with Dom when they're trying to reach the Rhino Nexus. He becomes very like kind of rude to him pretty much. He doesn't really respect Dom. He thinks he's just thinks everything's a joke, and he's very kind of critical of people. He does the same thing with RJ. He just kind of thinks RJ's this some goofball when they first meet him. And like he's very critical of Casey, given that he wasn't meant to be the original Red Ranger or their leader, kind of. And he does get on Willie occasionally for her being too nice and whatnot. So like he also has to go through that. Like he does get a good amount of growth. I just don't think it's as in depth as Casey's growth. I think that Theo's kind of arc is more personal. He's got a bit more of things he has to work out for himself. I mean, that's not to say they don't all have internal fights that they have to go through, but I think Theo's just isn't as big as an important as it is for, Casey. I think Theo is just more, he's got to learn how to chill out, not be as critical, and, counterbalance that with his being a rule follower and, doing what he has to do to get the job done. And you also see this during the Five Fingers of Poison. He's kind of also like a perfectionist. He believes that he has to be the one to do everything. He thinks there's no room for error when facing Gakko. And I just think that he does like have good moments. He does get, good story arcs, but it's just smaller and not as, important. I will say I do think Casey's arc is a bit more, it overshadows a lot of the other Rangers. I don't think it's Mystic Force Nick level overshadow, but I do think, it's a bit more bigger than the other Rangers. But I do think Theo and the others do get some time to shine, unlike in Mystic Force. But like I said, I do think they did a good job with Theo's arc and giving him this kind of, learning to chill out and be more more accepting and less critical of his friends. It was all a good thing and not be so hard on himself. I think they did some good jobs of Theo, and I think by the end, you see him become more of relying on his team, not as critical, and just overall better person in that sense. Again, I think Theo had some great development. He had some great arcs and a solid Blue Ranger for Jungle Fury. Then you got Lily the Yellow Ranger. Now, Lily's arc is more of that she needs to become a little bit more tougher. She's, needs to kind of become stronger. I feel like this day and age, with how things have changed, that would be very kind of a negative arc this day and age, because, it kind of is bad to kind of look at a girl and say she needs to be tougher. So this day and age, it's a bit of a hard thing to get by. But I do think with a show like Power Rangers, it's a thing that they can also incorporate and not feel like it's being forced or some kind of agenda. Or, have girls or women get turned off by it. But I do like Lily's arc. She is kind of like the mom of the group. She's the only female ranger on the team, and she kind of always looking after Casey and always kind of helping out the others. And you do get the sense that, she does feel like she has to take care of everybody else. And, she is kind of not more nice than the other guys. And you get the episode in the middle of the season, Bad to the Bone, where, she gets accidentally hit by one of the porcupine monsters quills, and it makes her more of like a tough badass kind of person, which is her part of the story where she learns at the end where she doesn't have to be tough. She's fine the way she is. She doesn't have to be strong. And I really like that. Again, it kind of gives a good lesson to girls/women that society might tell you need to be strong or tough, but that's not all that life's cracked up to be. You can still be nice, but you can also still be tough. And I think that gives Willie a good kind of nice arc there as well. Um, Willie is kind of, I feel like they don't give Willie as much to do, but I do like towards the end of the season how they did give her a little focus episode with Master Fant's niece. I think that was pretty cool. It gave her a chance to show that she can be a good teacher and set her up for anything that could come in the future for her story arc, even though we never got anything, but it showed that she could be a good teacher or mentor to someone, which I really liked. It goes along with kind of her, you know, mom kind of outlook with the group. So I really do like that. I think they did a good job of counterbalancing that, where she can be the mom of the group, but also be the strong, tough character that for a female character. Also, unlike other characters, she's not a Mary Sue, so she goes through an arc of having to learn these things. She doesn't just change all of a sudden. She goes through story that changes her perspective. She gets these good moments with and throughout the series where she actually does learn from these mistakes of being too nice or being too, you know, open to other people. So I really like that. It gave her a good arc and definitely gave her good, strong character moments throughout the season. Also, with Lily, we also have her relationship with Theo. Now, it's not really given 100% full attention throughout the series. It kind of is hinted at throughout the season, with their relationship. It's not given a forefront, which I do like, but you got earlier on in the season where they have been friends for a while. They have history at the Paishwa school. And I think it's one of those things within the season where, one, they don't totally understand their feelings and their friends until they kind of realize it at the end of the season, which I kind of like. I'm glad they didn't give it a full, on series, focus. I'm glad they kind of had it in the background and then had it end in the end, had it conclude at the end of the season. So, I like that it wasn't forced and it wasn't just some big reveal at the end. Again, like I said, they hinted at it throughout the season, and we finally got the payoff at the end. So, given both of these two characters, I think they were done very well, and along with their relationship was also done in a good way that doesn't feel forced. Then you got RJ. Now he serves as both the Ranger's mentor as well as the Purple Ranger, the first ever Purple Ranger we got in Power Rangers. So, I'm going to kind of be judging him based off of both mentor and being a ranger. Now, first off, as being a mentor, I think he's a very solid mentor character. He definitely has that kind of more goofy, hippie-like behaviors. So, he teaches in a different way. He has these different lessons and ways about teaching the Rangers. So I really like that. He's not your conventional, mentor, unlike Kruger with the other one who's, kind of I don't know if you'd call it police captain, but he was very strict, leader, followed the rules, while RJ is more of a, goofy kind of, he lets the Rangers just be the Rangers. He's one of those here that kind of, if you were a parent, lets kids be kids at times, but also when time comes for he's tough and calls them out for things, which I really like. He does that good balance very well, and he is a good mentor to all the Rangers and does a good job of teaching them all. And I also like the relationship he has with his dad. That also opens him up with more arcs and stories, given the estranged relationship with how his dad wanted him to follow the path of becoming a shark master, but he decided to go down his own path and become a wolf master. I don't know if that's how you'd call it, but he decided to choose the wolf animal spirit instead of the shark animal spirit. So I really like that. His relationship with his dad is really good, and I like the setup they do with him becoming the Purple Ranger. And I like the idea that he already had a morpher ready and was, set whenever this... I guess he kind of knew this was eventually going to come and happen to him. It does feel... Because I do feel like they could have added that in because it kind of felt like, wait, he had a morpher all set up. So I feel like you can interpret that he knew this was coming eventually, just didn't know when. So I really like that. And, you get to see RJ in his wolf spirit form, which you get to see the other masters in the finale, which you don't get to see the actual other rangers in, but it was cool that we get to see RJ in that form. And, I liked how the setup for him to become a ranger. You had him being kidnapped by Daishi, and in the fight with Daishi, that pretty much awokened his animal spirit kind of slash ranger powers. And he slowly became, his animal spirit slowly started to come out of whack. And it was Fran who brought him back. And through that, he became the Purple Ranger. I also like RJ's Morpher better than in the season because it's more of a wrist kind of morpher. I never was really a fan of the Rangers sunglass morphers. It kind of felt a little weird. Now, from what I understand, the Sentai, I think it was the Claw Booster was their morpher. I can understand why they didn't go that route. It kind of looks a little goofy and way too big to be a morpher in PR. But I feel like they could have gone down a similar route with RJ. I feel like the sunglasses is just kind of a more cheaper way to do it, which again kind of is a weak argument there. So I do kind of wish they had given them more like arm wrist morphers, kind of similar to like the Ninja Storm Rangers had, like the little discs or something like that. I think that would have been a better morpher. I mean, you did have Dom in the later half of the season kind of get the call booster morpher too. Um, I'm fine with that, but I do think that, the call booster and the sunglasses kind of weren't the best morpher for the season. I'm not saying doing another cell phone kind of motif, but I think they should have done something. If I had to say, I'd give them something similar to Ninja Storm, like little discs or wrist kind of morphers. I think that'd be good. It just is a thing that I didn't really like, and RJ did it better with his morpher. But, that's a subject for a different time. But, RJ was a good ranger. His, like I said, with in the Casey section, him taking control, being the mentor, and, kind of taking control as the leader later on kind of was a good move in storytelling because, he's the mentor. So logically, when he becomes a ranger, it makes sense that he'd take more of a command over Casey being the team leader. So I do like that. I think RJ was a solid ranger, especially given the, him being the first Purple Ranger. He was a mentor as well. So, I think what they did with him was very good. And they did show with the Strike Rider and the Claw Cannon, he is pretty tech savvy. Jungle Fury isn't a show that isn't a season that really connects with like tech very much. I think due to the fact that the jungle theme kind of severs those kind of ties. We didn't get a battleizer this season. And so, also that to do with the budget, but that's something else I'll get to later. But, they had RJ not needing a tech assistant, which worked out well given the season. I feel like they could have given that job to Fran, but again, I'm glad they didn't because, again, Jungle Fury is in a season that loans itself well to needing a tech assistant. It doesn't need tech. The, regular standard kung fu weapons and everything, the hand-to-hand combat was very much better used than any kind of like tech. RJ, I think, was a solid ranger. He filled out both the ranger responsibility and the mentor role very well. So it was a good counterbalance. And unlike other seasons, say like Kruger, when the mentor was also the ranger, he also was able to get in the fight more. I understand with Kruger that also might have come down to Sentai footage, and RJ also being a main ranger, that could have also helped out with him being able to get in the fight more. So, that was helpful as well. I also liked that it was not introduced early on. He was introduced mid-season. So, it gave time for the other three to be introduced and get them very well developed before RJ is introduced as a ranger. And then give him the middle of the season to kind of bridge out his arc in becoming a ranger before Dom joined the team towards the end of the season. Last and finally, from the core ranger team, we got Dom/Dominic. Now, he is the white ranger. He is the last of the core 5 to join the team. Now, he joins later in the season towards the end in his own little arc, followed up by the Phantom Beast arc. Now, He's more of the goofball of the group. He doesn't take things a whole lot seriously. And at the start, he gets into a lot of trouble with the rest of the Rangers because they think, again, he's immature, too goofy, and doesn't take things seriously. And it's a very interesting character because you got your structure is pretty good. You got the mentor, you got the cub, you got the straight and serious one, and you got the nice one, and then you got the goofball. So I like the dynamic here, and the other Rangers kind of have to figure out how to work with him. And it's kind of one of those situations where everybody's different. Not everybody's cut from the same cloth kind of thing. Just because they all went to the same school doesn't mean they're all the same. And we've learned this throughout the season with all the Rangers, especially with RJ and his dad. And you get to see how the Rangers had to bond with Dom and how they connect with him and how they are able to, connect, kind of form their team with him being the goofball. And he also becomes a bit more serious throughout his time with the Rangers. He takes on more responsibility and is not the same goofball he was when he first was introduced. Dom's story arc is kind of quick and done with really quickly, though, because he's introduced later in the season, so there's not a whole lot of development to give him. So they kind of just give him his character development within the Rhino arc, where he joins a team, he has to find the control dagger, and he gets the Rhino Megazord, and his arc kind of concludes there. I mean, there are still bits and pieces, but for the most part, Dom is kind of Dom. He's the goofball who kind of becomes serious and ends up dating Fran. So, you got that aspect there. So, you got these Rangers who got to connect with Dom. Dom is, like I said, he's the goofball. He does get another focus episode during the Phantom Beast arc. Again, it goes on to his responsibility levels. But still, like, not a great memorable episode. But it's still a good episode for him as a Ranger. I think it just is to touch back on the fact that he can be a bit of a goofball at times and not take responsibility, which is one of the biggest issues Theo has with him and the other Rangers because they don't think he's responsible. So, again, it goes back to that theme. And, the one thing I do wish we could have seen with Dom is him find another master and get his stripes. I'm going to assume that they just didn't have time, just given the fact that I had a 32 episode season. If we had 8 more episodes or so, I'm sure we would have gotten an arc of that where he ends up finding a master and getting his stripes. I think that would have been a cool thing. Honestly, it kind of would have been cool if it was RJ being his mentor, since the two of them have a past and connection there. Still, it was a good arc for Dominic. He was still a fun Ranger, still enjoyed him as a character. Again, him being introduced later in the season and it being a shorter season definitely did hinder his arc and story. But with what we had and what we got, I still think he was a solid addition to the Jungle Fury team. So next, in regards to the Ranger team, we have our 6 Rangers, which really aren't 6 Rangers in regards to Jungle Fury, because we actually have 3 extra Rangers, which are the Spirit Rangers. Now, I love the Spirit Rangers. They're one of my favorite things to come out of Jungle Fury. And one of the reasons why we didn't get a battleizer in Jungle Fury is the fact that a lot of the budget that would have gone to making a battleizer went to the Spirit Rangers. As much as I love battlizers, I'm glad we didn't get one here. One, I don't really know what they would have done with one for Jungle Fury, so I'm glad they spent the money here on the Spirit Rangers. I love the Spirit Ranger arc, especially with how they connect it with the Masters, and then not them being Rangers, but their spirits taking on Ranger forms. And, they have to fight their masters, or in a sense, which is really cool. I like that. And then, of course, you got the arc there and RJ having an idea, but ending up thinking he killed his father. And in the end, he, was actually saved in the Crystal Eye. It was a really great arc. I love the suits. And I think, the Spirit Rangers did add a bit of depth in regards to the story. They upped the stakes. They upped, this what they can do as the Phantom Beast. You have these villains, and when they can create these, these Rangers and force the Rangers to fight them, they also force the Masters, which is really kind of dark in Power Rangers, where you have the Masters chained up and forced to fight the Rangers. It was, in a way, it's kind of dark. So, like, you have the Rangers having to fight their own Masters, in a sense, and the Rangers suits again. I really like them. They're in the jungle master mode, so I really like that. So the Spirit Rangers definitely added a good sense of more fighting power, and they stuck around past their original arc and helped the Rangers the rest of the season. They made a good solid addition to the team. You don't really get a six ranger with Jungle Fury, so having the Spirit Rangers definitely added that kind of sense of like an extra slash six ranger. Yes, there are three of them, but I think it helped out the season with these Spirit Rangers. Um, and it affected everybody within the team in a different way. The only one I think it wasn't really affected with was Dom, given the fact that he didn't really have a connection to the Masters. He showed up later in the season, so I feel like his arc within the story was a bit hindered, but I'm okay with that because it focused more on the other four and their connection with their masters and having to face them as antagonists during this arc. So I really did enjoy it. I think they were a great addition to the team. They had a good story and made like the Rangers have to face something a lot more challenging than they usually would alongside the Phantom Beasts as they headed into the final arc of Jungle Fury. Then you get the Ranger allies. Now, with Jungle Fury, the Rangers really only have like one big ally with Fran. They do have some other ones but they're more like one and done episode allies, like Ruin with Theo or Gabby with Lily, and then you had the kid with Casey. You know, I feel like Jungle Fury didn't really have like big ally characters like other seasons. But when they did get allies or little friends there to help out, they did do a good job with having the Rangers be mentors to them and help them out and teach them some good lessons. So I did really enjoy that, like the one with Lily and Gabby teaching her not to be afraid of dancing. You had the one with or I think I actually had two of Casey. One in the beginning of the season with this kid who stole his money, and then the other one where a kid he was teaching karate to, and I really like that. He ended up having to be a mentor, and it came back to play in the Super Mega Force team anniversary episode. So I think that with those two characters, they were given good mentor moments. Like I said, you did have Ruin with Theo, his twin brother, and that offered up a good kind of closing arc for Theo as a character, and learning to kind of be comfortable with who he is in a way. So I really like that those three characters did a good job for each of the Rangers. I do kind of wish we had gotten a little bit more with them, especially with Gabby. I felt like it came out of left field. So I wish they would have done a little bit more. Again, also Casey's did also feel like it came out of a bit left field. They did kind of set Lewin up in the beginning of his episode, so it didn't feel like it came out of left field. But yeah, that's just how I feel. But like I said, you got the big main ally, which was Fran, this quirky friend of RJ's who's always hanging out in the pizza place. I really like that. She's very quirky. She offers a lot of good jokes. And at the same time, they're not cringy jokes. They're actually good, funny jokes. So I really like that. And then like throughout the season, she goes from just being a customer, then she ends up working there. And throughout the season, she ends up finding out who the Rangers are. I really like that. And one thing I also like is that she found out who the Rangers were earlier on in the season. Instead of it having to be this big reveal towards the end of the season. I kind of like that better because, I feel like she offered more help to the Rangers in working and mainly her job. I think, yes, it was a little bit less than other, allies, but I think it helped giving the smaller setting of Jungle Fury. And, she helped out when the Rangers had to go fight. And again, another thing I liked is they didn't kind of like wipe her memory and act like she never found out. Again, that would work with like the aesthetic of Jungle Fury, so it makes sense that didn't happen. But we've seen it in other seasons where like the Rangers' identity is revealed, but then somehow like their memory or whatever is wiped of it. So that definitely was a bump. That was definitely a good thing that I liked. Again, glad she found out early and it was able to help them throughout the season. So I think Fran definitely was probably the strongest of the Ranger allies. You also did have Flint, I guess, the little fly person that was with Camille. He helped the Rangers out a bit, especially with RJ during the Spirit Ranger arc. I don't know, I kind of consider him an ally, but at the same time, I'm 50-50. I mean, he's fine, but I feel like, he's just kind of there for plot reasons. I feel like he doesn't. We know like his backstory with Camille, being cursed, but at the same time, I feel like they could have done a little bit more with that, especially with him and RJ. I feel like they could have given them a bond, but I figure that what they did was fine with Flint. He was a smaller ally, so it makes sense. Fran was mainly the big ally for the Rangers. So now, next we had the Three Masters. Now, the Three Masters were really interesting, cool characters. Now, yes, we do have the three main masters, but I'm also going to be talking about the other masters. Now, the first master we have is Master Mao. Now, he didn't really get a whole lot of screen time, but he did play a good pivotal role within Casey's story arc and, teaching him to go on this journey of as being the Red Ranger. And I also like how he was the Ranger's original mentor and then kind of was killed off and the Rangers had to go find RJ. And I do think that's a little bit dark for PR because usually you don't get someone killed off. And so I really thought that was pretty cool. Well, I don't know if I'd say cool, but a good way of using the character. Again, I don't know if what his deal is with the Sentai footage, but I thought was a good utilized character. He had a good connection with Casey, like always watching over him and always being there when Casey needed him, even when Casey didn't know he needed him. So I thought that was a very solid story there with Mao and Casey and everything. Then you got Master Fan. Now, Master Fan is another great master. He was Lily's master. His animal spirit was the elephant. And I also liked how with his animal spirit, he lived in the jungle. As his animal spirit was the elephant, he lived off in a secluded area. I do wish we could have gotten a little bit more in his backstory and why he was in a secluded jungle. I feel like we got a little bit into it, but I feel like there could have been a lot more they could have done with it. Again, not a huge issue, but I do kind of wish we had gotten a little bit more backstory with the character. But again, he's not a main character, so it wasn't necessarily needed. But I think he did a good job with the master role. He taught Lily how to kind of toughen up a bit and teach her how to use the jungle mace. Again, I like how these masters were used when the story absolutely needed them. They weren't just brought in because this and that. They were brought in when the Rangers actually needed an upgrade or a weapon. So that was a really cool thing. And, I also like how you actually saw him fight alongside Lily in a few episodes when he was first introduced and then trying to, fight the Phantom Beast. It was a really cool thing to have that be done, especially given how he was a lot older at the time of filming. So, I feel like you don't really get to see much fight. Not to say people that older can't fight, but someone of that age, usually they're just kind of there to stand around, give advice. So it's nice and kind of cool to see him actually stand alongside Willie and fight. Then you got Swoop, who is Theo's mentor or master, and he possesses the spirit of the bat. Now, he kind of helped Theo kind of become more relaxed, or in different ways of fighting, and kind of got him out of that kind of stuck up kind of personality that he had. And I also like how there was a background between he was also RJ's master. So that was really cool. I feel like he did a good job with Theo. He didn't get to fight alongside Theo, which is kind of a little bit disappointing. But at the same time, I think he was fine. I don't know if the actor himself was blind, because in the show, the actor was blind, or the character was blind. I don't know if the actor himself is blind, which would actually be an interesting thing if they actually did do that, but I think it was cool. My biggest issue with Swoop, and it's not even, again, big issue, because he is a side character, was I wish his base was a little bit done better, because he kind of just was in the middle of the wilderness somewhere. So I kind of felt like that didn't really make sense. Like his animal spirit's the bat, and he's just in the wilderness. I'm not saying like he should have been in a cave but I feel like they could have done something a little bit better than just the wilderness. maybe they blew for their budget and they couldn't really do much. But at the same time, it just kind of felt a little out of place. Again, not a huge issue, but I do think Swoop could have improved by that. Like, well, not a big improvement, but just would have been a little bit nicer. But again, I did really like the history between him and RJ. Did wish, again, they could have expanded into that a bit more. For what we got, it was decent and good, but I feel like a few more episodes, we could have gone a little bit more with these masters. Again, what they did was still good, and I think they were very well handled. Then you got Master Finn, who is Casey's master and uses the spirit of the shark. Now, I really like this character. He was a very good, solid addition to the team, or to the Masters. And, you know, I think that his relationship with RJ also was very good and well handled. It added a little bit more to his character that the other two Masters kind of lacked. But I do like how they connected him to RJ and how he wanted RJ to learn to learn the shark spirit technique and fighting style, but RJ decided to go on his own path and learn the way of the wolf. And I really like that. I think it adds a lot more depth and gave these two characters a lot more to build off of, gave them a lot more interesting connections. Also with Casey, given the fact that, when he met Finn, he kind of, he felt like he didn't need RJ anymore. So in a way, it kind of felt like RJ was being rejected by Casey in favor of his father, which of course would bring up old wounds and everything. So I really liked how that kind of story kind of weave together between those three characters, allowing RJ to reconcile with his dad, allowing Casey to get a new master, and this whole arc to play out with the three masters. Again, I also like how the use of three masters was done in like an arc instead of just like, I feel like they could have done it one right after the other, but having it being an arc also works a little bit better because then like, it's a ranger arc and like you don't have them scattered throughout. And I feel like it could have worked better scattered out, but I think the way they did it worked in a better way and didn't really cause any hiccups. Because sometimes when you do these kind of things where masters show up, it's because like they force it upon you in the story. So I think the way they did it was very well handled. And then you got the three dead masters who live in the spirit realm. We got 2 episodes with them. Master Rilla, who had the spirit of the gorilla, Master Rope, who had the spirit of the antelope, and Master Gwen, who had the spirit of the penguin. Now, like I said, we only got 2 episodes with them. I wish we could have gotten more. Again, this comes down to the fact that they were in 2 episodes. We probably could have gotten more. And I guess they were kind of helping them escape the spirit world after they were sent there. They had to face their fears, and then originally they weren't going to send the Rangers back. And then once they were in Daishi was there, they helped them get back, and they also got their Jungle Master Mode power up. There's not a whole lot to say about these Masters. Like, yeah, they're cool, but we didn't get a whole lot with them. I wish we could have gotten more with them. Again, maybe that had to do with Sentai. Maybe it came down to the season being shorter. But, for what they did, being another, like, kind of mentor to the Rangers, it worked, kind of, but kind of felt a little out of left field as well. In a way, if it wasn't for the fact that they needed them for the Jungle Master Megazord, I feel like they could have been cut from the show and wouldn't really have changed much. But I feel like they could have been used in a better way. I think, I don't know if they necessarily need to be dead, but maybe kind of figure out a way to weave them into the story a little bit better and not have them feel like, they were just one-off characters where the other masters really weren't. Yes, they came back to fight in the finale, but, the three masters and that are in the, spirit realm are kind of forgettable, which just sucks because, the other masters are pretty cool, and these ones kind of are just bottom of the barrel, like afterthoughts, in my opinion. But still, cool, decent characters. Just wish they could have gotten a lot more to do. I don't know how much you could have gotten more to do with them, given they were in the spirit realm. But at the same time, for what we got with them, I think they were solid allies. Again, they were just more on the weaker side, but I think overall, if you look at all the masters in a whole, they did a great job with these Ranger allies. I think these are very strong Ranger allies, very right for the most part. Gave a lot of character building, gave a lot of, story building. and offered a lot more character development and helped them when the Rangers actually needed them. So again, I think they were solid allies and definitely a good addition to Jungle Fury. Then you got the villains. Now, the two main villains, of course, are Daishi and Camille, and they pretty much lead the whole thing. Now, Daishi starts off as just a spirit who possesses Jared, and I kind of feel like this is an interesting concept of having the villain possess the a friend of the Rangers. And I think him taking over Jared allowed it so that even though he was a spirit, it allowed Daishi to actually fight the Rangers off more often than not. So it allowed Daishi to still remain in the fight, but also be able to kind of sit in the background, which works out pretty good. And it also causes this inner turmoil with Daishi and Jared throughout the season, where, especially when the overlords come in and become Jared's masters, they kind of like have this conflicting view and kind of warp Jared's past to make him more evil and darker and able to connect more with Daishi. So I really like that. It was a very cool, interesting aspect. I think they also built up his turn to the good side also very well. Again, I feel like it was done good, but they could have done a little bit more. But with the time they had, they were able to do it in a good way that was a build up and not come out of kind of 100% left field. It somewhat felt like it did, but at the same time, I feel like they did build up to it at moments and kind of connections. Same thing with Camille. Camille is a very cool, interesting villain, but at the same time, she wasn't 100% a villain. She, kind of was at moments when to help Daishi, didn't want to help Daishi, was against his plans. So I think they did a good job with her character. I do feel like she could have used a little bit more backstory. I feel like she kind of was just there because they needed her to be there. But being a romantic thing with Daishi and slash Jared worked. But at the same time, I feel like we could have gotten a little bit more backstory with the character. She's humanoid, unlike Daishi. How did the two of them meet? Why did she turn evil? She's half human. If she's a human, it was a very interesting concept. I think it would have worked a tad bit more if she was an actual animal and then had a through some way turned into a human. I think that would have worked a little bit better. But being a human with no real backstory as to why she joined Daishi kind of hurt her a bit, but still a solid season. I think, her character was given what they best she could have with the time restraints. I think probably if we got more episodes, we could have gone a little bit more with Camille as a villain. But I think for the most part, they did a good job. Then you got the three big villain factions. Now, first off, you got the Five Fingers of Poison who show up early on in the season. They have their little arc earlier on. And I think these characters are pretty cool. I do, and again, I think this comes down to a season shortening, but I do feel like it would have been cool if we got a little bit more from them instead of just being this 5-episode or 6-episode arc. But at the same time, I think they worked very well with giving the Rangers a bit of a challenge, especially given them that they were more of kind of venomous and dangerous. It added it into the stakes of just your regular monsters and, taking them to another level. I know a lot of people talk about the one where Casey is stung by poison and, is supposed to be in pain and whatnot. And people say it was unrealistic. They kind of took the easy way out. I honestly don't care. I don't totally see the big deal with this. They weren't going to show Casey dying or keeling over in pain or something. It's a Y7 show. They're not going to do that. So I don't care that didn't happen. I know, or at least have heard that fans don't like that, but it never annoyed me or anything. And I did like how you had Naja who wanted to overthrow Daishi, and Camille ended up stabbing him in the back and everything. And I really like that. These villains definitely started off the season strong with their kind of stronger powers than your average monster. And then after that, and I think they did a good job with this because Naja had life talents that could resurrect monsters. So they used his life talents at the end. He only had 3 left, which allowed them to bring back the 3 overlords. Now, I love the overlords. Now, you have Carnosaur, the first one that was brought back, who was the Sky Overlord. He brought in some very interesting villains with Baiwai and Cardin. And, I think that what they did here well with him is using him to connect and, make him stronger, at least Jared's side, get rid of more of his goodness and embrace his more darker side of things. So I really liked that. I thought it was a very cool thing to do with Carnosaurus, the first one. Then you had Jellica, who, Camille brought in because she thought like Carnosaur was going too far, so she thought like Jellica would be a better fit, and also she was kind of also looking for her own master, only for her to turn on the two of them, or to turn on them, and she ended up strengthening him and making him even more evil. I like this. And then you bring in the third overlord, Grisaka, with the spirit of the grizzly bear. Also, Joica did have the spirit of the jellyfish. I forgot to mention that. But Grisaka shows up, and he has this undisdained and hatred for humans, and he just hates them. And seeing Daishi possessing a human angers him so much that he overthrows Daishi, and the overlords pretty much take control after that. And Daishi and Camille are kind of relegated to the back, but they still do play a pivotal role. But then Grisaka pretty much takes command for the middle half of the season, which I really liked. I think that this added a lot more stakes, and he used his own monsters to face the Rangers, stronger monsters. Again, really great concept. I do wish they also had used villain or monsters from both of the other two overlords, not just Grisaka, like more bird-like monsters and fish-like monsters from the overlords. I kind of would have liked to seen that, but at the same time, the monsters were fine and handled well. I understand maybe they weren't able, again, this probably goes back to the Sentai. The monsters were probably a certain kind of monster, certain kind of animal, so they probably couldn't have worked around that. But still, I think they did a solid arc here with the overlords and Rizaka. And eventually you have, when Don showed up, the race of the Rhino Nexus, because Rizaka harnesses this new Zocado power when he showed up that Daishi/Jared didn't have. And Daishi/Jared saw the Rhino Nexus as a way to get more power, which he did, and then used it to overthrow Grisaka and during the Rhino arc, or Dom's arc, you kind of see the fall of the overlords as the Rangers get more powerful, more stronger. So I really like that. So then you end the arc with the Phantom Beast arc. Now the three overlords were Scorch with the spirit of the Avalon Dragon, Weiger with the spirit of the White Tiger, and Snapper with the spirit of the Snapping Turtle. Again, I really like these Phantom Beasts. Again, they coincided with the Spirit Rangers arc, which I already kind of talked about. Loved that arc. Then you had another mini arc with Weiger and Casey, since they both possess tiger spirits. And, Daishi sent him on this mission. Weiger succeeded, but in the end, he also ended up betraying Daishi and helping the Rangers, which I really liked. I thought it was a really cool aspect. And then you also had these 8 warriors. Not much really to say about them. They were just kind of warriors that kind of helped out the Phantom Beasts. They were cool. I really liked their animal spirits and different kind of monsters than before. You could definitely see they had an upper power level, similar to Grisaka and his monsters. So I did really enjoy that. I think that upping the stakes with these monsters definitely added some scariness to them with the with them showing up with these different villain factions. I think that with these different villain factions, upping it each time definitely gave them a benefit and gave them a more sense of scary, more dangerous level when they bring in their own different monster groups within the overlords and the Phantom Beasts. So again, I think the villains did a solid job. Now I want to talk about the monsters separately. I did touch on them here and there in the monsters in the villain section, but I do like the monsters. They were different. Again, they were mostly focused on more land creatures, a lot more like I guess you would say carnivores, and kind of you had a lot of monkeys. It was more, like I said, mammals. You didn't get like a whole lot of like fish or birds or anything like that. I do feel like with the overlords, they could have done that a little bit more. But again, I'm assuming that's down to Sentai footage, but also, I think the monsters that they used were a lot better. They were more variety of monsters, more well-known animal types. So I think they did a good job there. And I also like how the monsters weren't just monsters. They kind of started out with the Rinshi foot soldier motif, and then in order to become the monster form, they had to gather fear and able to grow stronger, and then to grow bigger into the Megazord. I think to fight the Megazord, I think that's really cool. It's a different spin on things, and like with this mold, you had these little quips or whatever you want to call them that harnessed the monster spirit. Like you could have used multiple of these at one time to send out multiple monsters. A lot of times seasons just send out one monster for certain reasons, but this one, like if they wanted to, they could have sent out multiple monsters, which is really cool. I really like that, and I think the monsters definitely were well done and different in this season compared to other seasons. The animal motif gave them a lot more to work with and different animal types to work with. So again, I really like that, and I think they did a solid job with the villains and both the monsters and how they were utilized throughout Jungle Fury. Now, I just want to give my overall final thoughts on Power Rangers Jungle Fury. Now, I think this is a pretty much underrated season. I think that in regards to a lot of the other seasons, it is one of the ones that people forget a lot about, and I think it gets the unlucky. It's unlucky because it follows up Overdrive, which I think 99% of the fandom can agree that it's probably the absolute worst season of PR. And that's kind of hard to say given the Neo Sabat era. But to me, I think Overdrive almost nearly takes the cake on worst seasons, maybe only surpassed by Megaforce. But, it follows up Overdrive, which is a terrible season, but then gets overshadowed by RPM, which is a near amazing season. So I think Jungle Fury gets unfortunately marshmallowed or sandwiched between a terrible season and then a good season. So I think any season that follows up a bad season is kind of bad can kind of be forgotten about. And I think Jungle Fury got that unfortunate scenario. Now, if I had to give this season a grade, I would give it A with a 9.5 out of 10. I think that, like I said, I said this for most of the video. This is a underrated season, solid villains, solid rangers, solid ranger allies. I think it really did a good job at what it needed to be as a season. Is it the perfect season? No, but it's still like an A. It's definitely an A to S tier season, and I always think it is that way. Yes, some people might disagree, but those are just my overall thoughts and opinions. But let me know how you feel about Jungle Fury in the comment section down below. So yeah, guys, that's our review of Power Rangers Jungle Fury, the complete season. If you ever want me to do a review of a particular episode or kind of character analysis on any of the characters, let me know. But that is my review of Power Rangers Jungle Fury. As always, if you guys feel to get a big thumbs up and share, don't forget to hit subscribe button down below. Hit that bell icon to more Power Rangers content from me moving forward. And go for me on screen Twitter, which I linked in that section on my YouTube channel. As always, I'm Vision here, Boy Entertainment, and I'll see you next time.